So, Crimean natives. The Greek colonization in Crimea corresponds to the beginning of the Iron Age in North Pontic areas. The study of the sites of the Crimean population before and during colonization got started from the modern era, when the Crimea became interesting to such great empires as Ottoman, Russian, and Napoleonic France. The first descriptions of Crimean antiquities relate more to those sites that were only recently abandoned by their inhabitants. They can be found together with local ethnography in the travel notes of negotiators and earlier times travelers. Scientists who professionally described antiquities and understood the text of ancient authors appeared in the Crimea from the end of the 8th century. The first were Simon Pallas, a German scientist, German scholar who worked at the Russian court of Catherine II, and Dubois de Montpellier, who is associated with the interests of Napoleonic France. Actually, they were the first to describe burial structures in the form of stone cysts, which they connected with local inhabitants mentioned by the ancient authors. The further events led to the seizure of Crimea by the Russian Empire, and accordingly the formation of a powerful layer of Russian historiography as a basis of research into Crimean antiquities. After all, at the beginning of the 20th century, classical archaeologists equated burial sites of stone cysts with the Tauri of written sources, which they considered to be the local population of Crimea. In the first decades of the 20th century, prehistoric archaeology began to actively develop in the Crimea, as a result of which Bonch-Osmolovsky identified an archaeological culture named after the site of the first find, Kyzyl-Koba, determined its belonging to the local population of the Late Bronze and Early Iron Age, and separated it from other finds from the Stone Ages. Then Bonch-Osmolovsky noted in one of his non-fictions that looking at these material remains, the mentions of wild troglodytes Tauri involuntarily comes to mind. Further events in Soviet science led to large-scale oppressions, exactions, deportations, scientists to concentration camps in Siberia. The majority of Crimean researchers fell under these repressions. They were replaced by others, mainly cultural education workers, who did not really understand the intricacies of scientific research. In this way, the troglodytes Tauri mentioned in the work by Bonch-Osmolovsky become to population of the Kyzyl-Koba archaeological culture of Belov, Strzeletsky, Tumenev, and other Soviet archaeologists. Kolotukhin was the first who tried to separate these two concepts. He assigned out the so-called Late Bronze Age sites from the general array. When he continued to consider the rest of the sites of Kyzyl-Koba and belonging them to Tauri, later we approached this issue from another angle. We analyzed ancient texts from the point of view of their traditionality and belonging to ancient mythology and fragments of references of local ethnography. At the end, we confirmed Tolstoy's concept of the traditionality of the legends of Iphigenia to writing sources about Taurica, and in addition, we isolated ethnographic information about the local population which could have reached logographers from the stories of sailors and merchants. Our second step was the analysis of material culture. For this purpose, we singled out the most informative ones from the entire array of sites. Multi-layered ones with a fixed stratigraphy, which becomes the basis for the selection of synchronous complexes, and others that were analyzed according to the schema created on the basis of the analysis of multi-layered sites. At the end, the classification of ceramics based on more than 70 formal features was formed, which provided small groups, species of ceramic vessels. Species were grouped into rows, and types of ceramics were formed. At the same time, the species is a narrow chronological category characterized by the separate ornamental motif and style with other characteristics that can be attributed to other types. The type may include different motifs and styles of ornament on the vessel, but the constant in each type is the shape of the vessel. The duration of types in time formed periodization in culture. The remaining signs of culture, both artifacts and processes, which such as the economic model and its components, infrastructure, house construction, planning, crafts, etc., confirmed the correctness of the location of periods, since their dynamics considered with periodization, explaining its phenomena. Two early periods have been defined as pre-Taurian, the material culture of which belongs to an unknown ethnic group. It was formed from migrants from the Balkan Carpathia, local tribes of the Belozerka culture of the Lower Dnieper, and the so-called Late Bronze Age of Crimea, relicts of the Belozerka culture at the end of the 12th-10th century BC. It is so worth noting that the culture of the Lower Dnieper and Crimea in the 12th-10th century BC is identical and is most likely one of the local variants of the Belozerka culture. These tribes lost their integrity in the middle of 8th century BC. Here is older pre-Taurian period. This is few sites, not many, and younger pre-Taurian period. The size is more than twice more. Those tribes lost their integrity in the middle of the 8th century BC. From that time on, one could talk about the formation of a few ethnoses or tribes, which is represented by the material culture of the Taurian period. It is likely that the Greek came into contact with this population, then they founded their colonies in Taurica. Here is the sites of Taurian period. Its ethnic features disappear in the second half of the 4th-3rd centuries BC. In the future, the material culture of the local population is the basis for the formation for the Late Scythian material complex. This was the main conclusion of our dissertation research, on the basis of which all subsequent work, both field and laboratory, was carried out. And here is the two phases of Taurian period. Here is the first, before Greek colonization of south western Taurica. And here is the Taurian period, second phase, with the beginning of colonization and a period of Kerkinitida, Kerkinis, Masliny, Panske, and Chersonesos, the Tauric Chersonesos. So I turn to the main results of the research. Despite the rather compact location of the coast, different parts of the Pontic region sometimes have completely different histories and cultures. This is due to the fact that it is a frontier of several different civilizations in terms of origin, worldview, religion, and social organization. Some Greek provinces are characterized by the synchronous or sequential adaptive activity of several of them at once. One of these regions is Crimea, sometimes at the beginning of the Iron Age, which we define in the region as the 9th century BC. Historical processes were characterized by the same conditions as during the final Bronze Age in the entire northern Black Sea and eastern Mediterranean. The starting point of which is probably the revival in the Balkans, which led to the events known like the Trojan War. Crimea was inhabited by tribes that advanced to the peninsula from the area of the Gava cultures, where they founded a number of fortified settlements. Subsequently, after a century, we record active manual contacts between the inhabitants of these seaside settlements and the population which left sites of the Belozerka culture of the Lower Dnieper region and the so-called Late Bronze Age culture of the Crimea, which, as can be seen from the analysis of their material culture, are a single cultural massive. One of the largest seaside fortified settlements, Uchbash, here it is, began to master the newest technology of obtaining iron from local ore. Here is workshop of Uchbash. At this time, many new settlements appeared in the foothills of Crimea, characterized by the identical features in material culture. This population occupied all the foothills. In archaeology, these sites are the Kyzyl-Koba culture. The entire array of sites from their appearance to the end of their existence in the middle of the 8th century BC is divided into two periods. The older pre-Taurian periods, 12th, 10th centuries BC, the emergence of settlements with a new economy and the construction of the local construction of the local material complex, and the younger pre-Taurian period. Here it is, 9th, middle of the 8th centuries BC, the beginning of the application of iron production technology and the use of iron object. Here was the places of metallurgy production. Here it is, and here it is, and here it is. This is the time of the greatest well-being of local culture and economic development, when a new metallurgical province arose based on a reminiscence of half-state traditions, the selection and personalization of crafts, the predominance of quality and aesthetic over quantity in material production, the development of agronomy, the beginning of the allocation of personal share and probably living space, which is adapted to the production of deposits of local surface hematite ores, the remains of which are still found in the limestones along the faults of the entire foothill Crimea. The next historical period in Crimea began with the line of fires in the richest fortified settlements and hill forts of the northern Black Sea region, which is connected by the material complex brought with the nomads who left Novocherkasska antiquities of the early Scythian culture. One can argue about their name, Cimmerians, Cimmerians, or early Scythians, but in fact, from the destruction they caused, a new era began in the region, and the processes of the Scythian period began. Here is finds of things of Chernogorovka type, which is typical for Crimean finds. The main site which I analyzed was Uchbash. And here is a line of finds of Novocherkasska type artifacts, which connect with finds of Uchbash finds. It should be noted that the local population had contacts with nomadic world before, and they were not always peaceful. It is assumed that the Uchbash settlement burned down for the first time as a result of the Chernogorovka type nomads attack. But unlike the time of the attacks of Novocherkasska type tribes in the middle of the 8th century BC, events at the turn of the 10th, 9th centuries BC did not lead to the death of the settlement and a change in its economic arrangement. On the contrary, from the time it can be assumed that the local tribes began to master the land routes of communication, together with sea routes that they used before. It is likely that this interaction led to the emergence of one of the earliest centuries of iron metallurgy in the Uchbash settlement.